In 1961, Herk Harvey had been working as a director, writer, and producer for educational film production company Centron for the past decade. One evening, while driving home from a shoot in Los Angeles, Harvey caught sight of the abandoned Saltair Pavilion on the outskirts of Salt Lake City. The dilapidated site, once home to a carnival and ballroom frequented by the likes of Glenn Miller, compelled Harvey to pull over and take a closer look. Inspired by its eerie but grand facade, upon arriving home in Kansas, Harvey asked friend and Centron collaborator John Clifford if he could write a screenplay for a feature film based on the site. The last scene, I told him, had to be a whole bunch of ghouls dancing in that ballroom, remembered Harvey to the LA Times in 1990. The rest was up to him. In under a month, Clifford conceived the story of Mary Henry, a young church organist who, after emerging as the sole survivor of a car crash, takes on a new job in a new town. Unfortunately, her fresh start is quickly derailed by visions of pale-faced ghouls and the siren's call of a local abandoned carnival. Filmed over a mere 3 weeks with a budget of $33,000, Carnival of Souls is considered one of the greatest triumphs of low-budget cinema, a disorientating psychological horror soaked in dread, like a nightmare caught on film. Harvey aimed for Carnival of Souls to have the look of Bergman and the feel of Cocteau, with the hope that the film would find a home in art house cinemas. Unfortunately, distributor Hertz Lion failed to recognize its artistic merit, shaving off 9 minutes so that the film could be shown as a drive-in double feature. Shortly after shooting wrapped up, Harvey would take off to do a series of industrial films in South America. When I got back, I heard that the film was playing around, and I called the distributor and said I figured we had some money coming. He agreed that was right and sent a check. It bounced. I knew we were in trouble. For nearly 3 decades, Carnival of Souls remained relatively unknown, until repeated late-night screenings on US television began to attract attention. In 1989, the film was restored and re-released in New York. At subsequent press interviews, Harvey and the rest of the cast would express appreciation over renewed interest in the film.
That we're enjoying the revival of Carnival of Souls is fun. It's fun, I think, for all of us that were in it, because we thought that about 25 years ago it had died a natural death.
But what is it about Carnival of Souls which is so compelling? How did a film seemingly destined for failure achieve rebirth? Carnival of Souls opens abruptly with a drag race gone wrong in rural Kansas. Mary Henry, played by the film's only professionally trained actor, Candice Hilligos, is a passenger in a car alongside 2 other young women when it plunges off a bridge into a muddy river. Hours after police start dredging the water, Mary miraculously appears on the riverbank, unable to recall how she survived. Seemingly recovered from her ordeal, Mary accepts a new job as an organist at a church in Utah and promptly sets off interstate. Shortly after passing an abandoned pavilion, she experiences her first vision of a character known simply as the Man, a silent but foreboding figure played by Herk Harvey himself. In Utah, Mary rents a room at a boarding house next to a man named John Linden, played by acting student Sidney Berger, who is attracted to Mary and repeatedly attempts to flirt with her. Despite being warned by her new boss, the church minister, not to enter the local pavilion, Mary finds herself drawn to the site, making a connection between the carnival and the ghostly man who haunts her. While shopping at a department store, Mary realizes that she has become invisible and inaudible to those around her. The episode ends when she meets Dr. Samuels, who offers to help Mary, bringing her back to his office. Whilst practicing the organ at church, Mary lapses into a trance and is asked to resign by the minister, who denounces her strange compositions as sacrilege. That night, Mary accepts John's invitation to go out to a bar, but when they return home, Mary sees the man in her mirror and screams in terror. Believing Mary to be insane, John leaves. With her visions intensifying, Mary attempts to leave town, but experiences another silent episode which is revealed to be a nightmare. After waking, she returns to the pavilion, where she watches ghouls dance and sees an undead version of herself in the arms of the man. She tries to run away, but collapses as they close in. The following morning, Mary's footsteps are found on the shore, with no trace of her body. Back in Kansas, the girl's car is finally retrieved from the lake, with Mary dead inside. At the heart of Carnival of Souls lies a potent study on alienation, which, in social psychology, refers to a sense of self-estrangement and absence of social support or meaningful social connectedness. Mary is an inherently lonely character with no interest in, or perhaps no ability to form social connections. Upon rewatching the film, one can't help but wonder how she ended up as a passenger in a drag race. I decided early on to give the heroine no real sympathy or understanding from any other character, Clifford later said. So for the viewer, there's no relief from her dilemma. Most people can relate to the feeling of isolation experienced by Mary, especially when moving to a new town or after experiencing a traumatic event. The increasing sense of disconnection felt by her character is one of the film's greatest strengths. A common interpretation of Carnival of Souls is that the events that transpire are Mary's dying thoughts as she drowns beneath the surface of the lake, a manifestation of regret over a lonely life. This is touched upon during Mary's conversation with Dr. Samuels, who suggests that the man may represent a feeling of guilt relating to her desire for human connection. While she rejects his psychoanalysis, it is clear that Mary makes a conscious effort to avoid human contact. This is first witnessed at the very beginning of the film, when Mary chooses not to make a final visit to her parents on her way to Utah, or when she rejects her boss's proposal for a welcome party in her honor. To an extent, Mary views her relationships with people just as she views her relationship to the church, as merely transactional.
This morning when I brought you the coffee, friendly.
This morning I needed company.
It is only when afraid of being alone that Mary relents to the advances of her creepy neighbor. Whilst many critics dismiss John Lyndon as an unsavory byproduct of the era, his character gives us a deeper insight into Mary's psychology, while stirring sympathy for her lack of companionship in the face of a terrifying ordeal. Yet, as frightened as Mary is of the ghouls, she is equally intrigued by the abandoned carnival. Her relationship with the undead directly reflects her attitude toward the living. Another theory put forth when discussing Carnival of Souls is that Mary is trapped in some kind of purgatory after perishing in the car accident. This is more in line with the character's own understanding of her situation. Whilst talking to Dr. Samuels, Mary explains that
He's trying to prevent me from living. He's trying to take me back somewhere.
in this theory, the man could be thought of as a personification of death, tracking Mary down in a manner akin to the Twilight Zone episode The Hitchhiker. The story, which draws frequent comparisons to Carnival of Souls, follows a similarly Hitchcockian blonde, Nan Adams, on a cross-country trip as she is stalked by a lone hitchhiker. Toward the end of her journey, Nan stops at a payphone to make a call to her mother, only to learn that her mother has suffered a mental breakdown over the death of her daughter. As it turns out, Nan had died in a car crash at the beginning of her trip. If, like Nan, Mary is already dead, are the other characters in the film living beings interacting with her ghost? This would explain the episodes Mary experiences in the latter half of the film, where she is unable to make contact with those around her. Or are the characters who interact with Mary, the minister, Dr. Samuels, and John, spiritual guides attempting to lead her to the light, in contrast with the ghouls who eventually claim her? Many scenes in the film can be read to favor this interpretation, such as the morning after Mary's date with John. Dr. Samuels pays a visit to the home and tells the landlady that Mary is planning to leave town. "I hope she does leave," the landlady professes, to which Samuels states, "I hope she can." If Mary is in purgatory, perhaps her sin is her rejection of religion. Shortly before leaving Kansas, Mary's boss urges her to put her soul into her music. After inviting himself into Mary's room, even John is perplexed to learn that Mary's connection to the church has no spiritual basis.
Thinking like that, don't that give you nightmares?
More cynical interpretations may argue that Mary's misdeed is simply being a woman in a man's world. Whilst famed horror director George A. Romero admitted that the makeup of the zombies in Night of the Living Dead was inspired by the ghouls in Carnival of Souls, fewer connections have been drawn between the progressive identity of the film's main protagonists, a decision which has undoubtedly contributed to the longevity of both films. Mary is a single, career-oriented woman who repeatedly rejects the advances and opinions of the men in her life, in an era where women were expected to settle down and obey their husbands. Ben, the protagonist of Romero's film debut, is a black man living in the South at the height of the civil rights movement. If Ben warns us of the dangers of racial division, Mary warns us of the dangers of patriarchal suppression. As written by Brian Tallarico, one of the many brilliant elements of Harvey's work here is how menacing he makes the world around Mary, even when there is no evident threat. The entire world can be an evident threat to a woman alone. It should be noted that Carnival of Souls was not crafted with hard analysis in mind. In later interviews following the film's revival, Harvey and Clifford would state that many details picked up by audiences weren't intentional. Nonetheless, it is the film's inherent ambiguity which continues to attract new fans, from David Lynch to Lana Del Rey. Not to mention Morris Prather's dreamlike cinematography, Gene Moore's eerie organ score, and the wonderfully evocative performance of Hilligoss. No matter how one interprets the narrative, one thing is for certain. For over 60 years, audiences have been mesmerized by Mary's journey as she walks the line between life and death. Here's to a long afterlife ahead for Harvey's timeless cult classic.